Okay, let's get into it. We've all heard the highlights. The two-sentence summaries of famous historical mysteries. The vanishing sailors, the haunted houses.
The campfire story versions.
Exactly. But today, we're doing a deep dive where we look past all that. We're focusing entirely on the pieces of the puzzle that, well, that just don't fit.
We're examining those foundational moments in documented history when reality itself just seemed to crack, when the laws of physics or even just the laws of sanity were violently disregarded.
We have 4 sets of historical sources lined up, and each one details an event that is so fundamentally inexplicable that they've defied, every single attempt at a rational scientific explanation for generations.
Right, and our mission here is really critical. We want to extract the specific, non-negotiable details from these accounts. We're not interested in the folklore that grows up around these things.
Yeah.
We're interested in the documented physical contradictions, the things that stick in your mind, long after you've put the book down.
These sources detail 4 of the most unsettling mysteries I've ever come across. First, a domestic haunting on the American frontier that ended not just in psychological torture, but in a documented physical murder.
Then we have this terrifying, physically impossible struggle happening inside a completely sealed stone tomb in the Caribbean.
From there, a silent, almost geometric vanishing act by 3 professional men on a remote Scottish rock.
Oh.
And finally, a horrifying whispered message of death from a ghost ship discovered off the coast of Asia.
The connecting thread across all of these cases is the absolute loss of control, not just by the people involved, but, and this is crucial, by the environments themselves.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in each scenario, normal life, a predictable farm, a sealed tomb, a secure lighthouse, a stable ship was suddenly and completely obliterated. Something external just broke all the rules.
And that's the promise of this deep dive. We're moving past the what if and into the what we know cannot be rationalized. So let's settle in.
Yeah.
We're going deep into some very unsettling archives today, starting with a nightmare that was rooted in the most honest place on earth, fertile land in the American heartland.
The Bell Witch?
We begin in Adams, Tennessee, 1817. And the setting here is, I think, it's everything. John Bell was the very definition of the American frontiersman.
Absolutely. He believed in the tangible, the weight of his harvest, the strength of his livestock, the structural integrity of his own home.
He was an anchor of common sense. And it was exactly this sense of common sense that this entity seemed absolutely determined to destroy piece by piece.
What's so fascinating here, and what the sources really emphasize, that the torment started subtly, almost innocuously, that it began in the clear light of day, not under the cover of darkness.
And it started outside, not in some spooky attic.
Right. It began with a sound. The accounts detail this relentless gnawing, scraping against the outside walls of the house, like some great, frantic beast was trying to burrow through the timber.
And the family's response was completely rational. John Bell and his sons, often armed, they'd rush outside expecting to find a raccoon, a coyote, maybe a neighbor's dog. But they found nothing. Just undisturbed dirt and quiet trees. And that's the first crack in reality, isn't it? You can explain a physical scratch on wood.
Yeah.
You cannot explain a sound that leaves no mark on the surface it's supposed to be scraped against.
It was like the entity was training them to distrust their own senses right from the very beginning.
And then that campaign of psychological assault moved inside the house.
It did. The sound phenomenon was amplified, and it became localized, focusing on the 2 daughters, Betsy and her sister, in their bedroom. It shifted to the sound of a violent, frantic rat gnawing. But the key detail the family recorded, the thing that made it so terrifying, was that the sound was so intense and so close that it seemed to vibrate in their very teeth.
That gives me chills. That's the feeling of a physical presence, but without the physical form.
Exactly. And still, when they'd light a lamp, there was no source, no displaced dust, just smooth, untouched wood.
But the entity, it quickly realized that sound wasn't enough to break them. So it escalated. It went beyond sound, and the violence became physical, direct, and increasingly focused on the children.
This is where it gets really ugly. Unseen hands started ripping the blankets right off the kids, tossing them across the room.
Invisible fists began to pummel the boys. And the sources are clear. They would have unmarked bruises, contusions that appeared without any visible source of impact.
Pillows were snatched from under their heads and hurled across the room. They even reported this cold, malevolent breath brushing against their cheeks while they slept.
The house was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a trap they couldn't escape.
And the shift from that kind of random physical chaos to intelligent communicative malice is the terrifying turning point in the sources.
So it starts to talk.
Not at first. First, it appeared to mimic the family's prayers. It would start as this faint, whispered rasp, reciting the holy words just a half beat behind them, turning their devotion into this distorted, frightening echo. And that signaled intelligence, not just some residual energy. This was something thinking.
And then it introduced itself.
It found its own voice, a voice described as shrill, spiteful, incredibly clear, and often using this sing-song, childlike chatter. And it named itself Kate.
Kate. It sounds so simple, so harmless.
Deceptively so. This entity, this Kate, possessed unnerving, almost omniscient knowledge. It could recite word for word private conversations that family members had held miles away in the nearest town.
How is it even possible?
It's not. It also sang hymns it had supposedly never heard, only to then immediately corrupt them with these vile, raucous, laughing verses that were deeply, deeply offensive to this very religious family.
The cruelty was surgical.
Absolutely. Kate developed this all-consuming obsession with the patriarch, John Bell, and his young daughter, Betsy. The abuse was systematic and intensely personal.
Betsy really suffered the worst of it, didn't she? The physical attacks.
Oh, yeah. Pinching, slapping, her hair being pulled until she screamed. And crucially, these were not just ghostly rumors. These attacks left visible, raised welts on her skin, marks made by invisible fingers that people could see.
And it was whispering things to her, too. The sources say it was actively sapping the light from her eyes, trying to just completely break her spirit.
Kate essentially declared herself a monstrous new member of the family, like a spoiled, malevolent child whose bizarre whims became law in that house.
It demanded hospitality. I remember reading that. It specified a certain room in the house as its own, and once even demanded a bowl of sugar.
A bowl of sugar. And if they refused, it meant a night of absolute targeted terror for the entire household. This is not your classic haunting, where a ghost relives a trauma.
Yeah.
This is a siege by a purposeful, intelligent, and focused personality that seems to be driven purely by malice.
And this leads us to the chapter that makes the Bell Witch so unique in American folklore. The external validation.
General Andrew Jackson.
The man himself, the future president. At the time, he was this famous, iron-willed military leader, a man who prided himself on pragmatism and physical strength.
And he viewed the claims coming from the Bell farm as, superstitious nonsense. He thought it was being perpetuated by what he called overly excitable frontier folk.
So he decides to go see for himself. Trayson arrives with a full detachment of his hardened soldiers and a few trusted skeptics, fully prepared to debunk the entire myth.
But the witch had other plans. It had promised in a loud voice that the whole family heard that she would halt his carriages before they ever reached the house.
And the sources confirm she did. Jackson's heavy, military-issue wagon wheels just ceased turning.
Not slowly, not like they were getting stuck in mud. They stopped violently, as if the axles had been fused instantly to the Tennessee soil. They couldn't move forward or back, despite the ground being perfectly clear and level.
So Jackson, being a decisive man, immediately orders his men to find the physical impediment.
Of course. They search, they dig, they check the wheel spokes, and they find absolutely nothing. No obstruction, no mud, no physical reason at all for the stoppage.
They had to abandon the carriages and walk the final distance to the house. I mean, you have to imagine that would have already unnerved even the most hardened soldier.
Oh, absolutely. And then came the definitive moment of proof for Jackson's party. One of the soldiers, described as a notably cocky man, declared loudly that he'd seen 100 witches and he would kill this one with his pistol.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake. The sources detailed that before the words were even fully out of his mouth, he was promptly slapped, pinched, and then physically levitated by his breeches.
He was lifted into the air.
Hoisted into the air by an unseen force, dangling there until he begged for mercy and rescinded his boast.
And Andrew Jackson witnessed this physical impossibility.
He did, and his reaction is the ultimate validation in the sources. He didn't stay to investigate further. He didn't offer some rational explanation. He left immediately.
And he proclaimed famously, "I would rather fight the British in the Battle of New Orleans again than face this Bell Witch."
His advice to the Bell family was succinct and born of pure primal fear. He just said, "Get out of this cursed house."
But John Bell couldn't get out. Kate's hatred, which started as psychological, it became a physical poison specifically aimed at the patriarch.
Our sources detail a frightening systematic decline in John Bell's health. His strong physical body just began to fail.
He was plagued by fits, severely swollen tongue, and eventually a locked jaw. He started staggering, and finally he just lay paralyzed, his eyes wide with this silent, abject terror.
And this brings us to the final, chilling act of malice, the documented murder. While Bell lay paralyzed and helpless, a small, half-filled vial was discovered in the family medicine cabinet.
It contained a strange, dark liquid that no one in the family recognized.
And Kate, the entity, confessed. With this unnerving, high-pitched glee, it cackled, "I gave it to him. I put it there. It's enough."
The family, terrified but needing to know for sure, tested the strange liquid.
They did. They administered a small amount to the family cat, and it immediately went into convulsions and died in seconds.
The evidence, according to the official accounts gathered afterward, pointed definitively to murder. A murder administered by an invisible, malevolent hand.
And the celebration that followed is, for me, maybe the most horrifying and grotesque detail of the entire saga.
At John Bell's funeral.
At his funeral, as the somber procession carried his heavy coffin to the grave, a clear, childish, sing-song voice, Kate's voice, rang out from the empty air. It was singing a raucous, deeply inappropriate, jeering song of victory.
Old Jack Bell is dead. I've got him at last.
The entity's mission of targeted, focused destruction was complete.
With Bell gone, the intensity of the fury began to wane. The entity promised Betsy peace. It delivered a terrifying prophecy of future war and bloodshed in the region.
A prophecy some sources claim was remarkably accurate regarding the Civil War.
Right. And then it announced its departure, but it promised to return in exactly 100 years.
The final location it mentioned was a Bell cave, the one spot John Bell had absolutely forbidden his children from ever playing in.
It's this dark, cold, yawning mouth in the earth, dripping with perpetual dampness.
And the suggestion in the sources is that the entity didn't just disappear, it retreated. It went back to this forbidden, unseen place to wait.
And that location remains. The sources suggest that if you stand near the entrance of the Bell Cave today, you might feel a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. The feeling of a watchful, patient intelligence just waiting for its next audience.
The Bell Witch left behind this chilling residue of targeted personal hatred, culminating in a clear, documented act of physical homicide, and one that was validated by multiple external witnesses, including a future president.
That was pure, targeted hatred in Tennessee. If malice is a contained, focusing force, does it need air and open space to move things? Because our next case, the Barbados Vault, it takes place in a totally sealed environment, and it presents a geometric problem that fundamentally breaks the rules of physics.
We move south across the Atlantic to Christchurch Parish, Barbados, at the beginning of the 19th century. This isn't a slow, evolving mystery like the Bell Witch. This is an instantaneous physical contradiction that was discovered repeatedly over a period of 11 years.
The location itself is crucial to the impossibility of it all. The Chase family vault was built directly into a hillside.
Right. So while the outside island heat was just intense, the vault itself was cool, dark, and designed for absolute permanence and sanctity.
And the physical security was paramount. The entrance was sealed by a massive slab of blue Devon marble.
And the sources really emphasized the meticulous fit of this door. The slab was so heavy it required multiple men and specialized levers just to move it, and it was fitted so perfectly into the stone frame that a knife's edge couldn't slip through the join.
It was designed to be impervious. The whole point was to ensure the dead would rest forever, undisturbed.
The first occupants were small. Little Mary Anna Chase was interred in 1808. She was followed 2 years later by her elder sister, Dorcas Chase, who is said to have died of a broken heart.
Likely from the severe environment created by their notoriously harsh father, Thomas Chase.
And this is where the dread starts. Discovery number 1. When the marble seal was finally pried loose to allow Dorcas's entry, they immediately saw Mariana's small, lead-lined coffin.
It was no longer resting neatly in its corner.
Not at all. It was found hurled and lying upside down in the center of the vault floor, as if it had been tossed by a giant, indifferent hand.
Okay, I have to stop you there. This is the first critical contradiction. The marble seal was intact, the lock was undisturbed, no human could have entered or left.
Correct.
Yet this incredibly heavy, small, lead-lined coffin was violently displaced.
Precisely. The initial fearful conclusion of the mourners was that this had to be the work of vandals or ghouls. It was deeply unsettling, but it was sort of necessary to maintain their sanity.
So they righted the coffin, put everything back in order, and meticulously resealed the vault, certain that whatever caused this was now, contained.
But the torment manifested into full-blown, undeniable violence during discovery number 2.
This time, the vault was opened for the patriarch himself, Thomas Chase, and the sources paint him as a truly dreaded man. Harsh, feared. Plantation slaves reportedly celebrated when he died.
His coffin was a statement of his importance, or maybe his need for protection. It was a true behemoth of lead. It required 8 incredibly strong men just to carry its dreadful weight down the hill and position it within the vault.
We really have to spend time on the kinetic energy required to move a mass like that.
We do. And when the light from their torches was brought inside, the scene they found was just pure chaos. It was permeated not just by the expected stench of decay, but by this unsettling smell of violence and displaced earth.
The sisters' coffins had been flung to the far walls. One was propped awkwardly upright, and little Mariana's coffin was again found upside down.
But the greatest horror was the patriarch's monstrous casket. Thomas Chase's coffin, the one that took 8 men to carry, had been shoved, dragged, or thrown a full 12 feet into the back of the vault.
And the sources noted deep, fresh scrape marks in the stone dust on the floor, from the friction of the lead against the coral.
Right.
This is where we shift from a haunting to a physics failure.
Yeah.
How do you move immense weight? We're talking hundreds, possibly over 1,000 pounds, in a sealed, airless, dark space with zero sign of human entry or exit.
And the force appears targeted. It seems angry. This demanded official attention. It had to move beyond family gossip and hushed rumors.
Exactly. The governor of Barbados, Lord Combermere, became personally involved. He was a skeptical, authoritative figure who understood structural integrity.
And he recognized immediately that, quote, no human could have moved that weight in a sealed space and then flawlessly resealed the door from the outside. He ordered a full, meticulous investigation.
They checked the floor for secret tunnels.
Solid coral rock.
They sounded the thick walls.
No hollow spaces, no possible side entry. It was a sealed box.
And the critical test he devised was brilliant in its absolute simplicity. It was designed to defeat any future claim of human intervention.
It was. They meticulously arranged the coffins again, forcing them back into their original orderly spots. Then they smoothed a layer of fine white sand across the entire floor of the vault.
The sand was the trap. If a human entered, the sand would show footprints. If water rushed in, the sand would be disturbed or washed away.
And if the coffins moved, the sand would show the drag marks of the lead on the stone. Lord Combermere personally supervised the resealing of the marble door with fresh cement, and then pressed his personal seal, his signet ring, into the soft material at the edges.
This guaranteed that only he would know if the seal had been broken. It was a perfect control for the experiment.
4 years passed. The dread on the island built. In 1819, the governor returned for the inevitable, terrifying discovery number 3.
The cement bore his unbroken seal. The marble slab, unmoved by time or any element, was only shifted by the men and levers they brought for that exact purpose. Everything on the outside suggested perfect, eternal rest.
But the scene inside contradicted everything. The white sand lay smooth, utterly undisturbed, save for the deep, chaotic gouges leading away from the coffin's original positions.
So the coffins had moved, but there were no footprints in the sand.
No footprints. The heavy Chase coffin was again hurled to the furthest wall. The others were piled in this mad, chaotic pyramid, with little Mariana's small, innocent coffin, the first one to ever be moved, perched precariously at the apex. It was a tableau of pure, directed, chaotic hatred.
This is the crux of the physical impossibility.
Right.
It's the nugget you need to hold on to. The evidence forms an utterly unsolvable contradiction.
If the coffins were moved by some internal violent force, a spirit, a raging entity, whatever you want to call it, why was the sand covering the floor a perfect indicator of any movement, left smooth and untouched?
It's geometrically impossible.
We can rule out the mundane causes with absolute certainty. No flood because the vault was on a hill and the sand was bone dry.
No earthquake.
Right. No earthquake because only the coffins had moved. The surrounding structure, the walls, the marble door frame, they were all perfectly intact.
The displacement required kinetic energy beyond human capacity, yet the absence of displaced sand defeats any rational internal force explanation we can come up with.
The learned men who witnessed this, the governor, the magistrate, the clergymen, they were silenced. Lord Combermere, faced with proof that contradicted all known laws of physics and engineering, made a decision born of what the sources call sheer primal dread.
He decided the ground was cursed, or the entity was simply too powerful to be contained by stone.
The resolution was radical and immediate. The coffins were removed and buried separately in the earth outside the vault. The vault itself was immediately abandoned, its massive marble door left gaping like a silent scream and open forever.
It's an enduring symbol that something contained within its walls was driven by a violent rage that defied physics and would not rest.
And the enduring residue. The sources claim that sometimes, if you stand at the mouth of that gaping hole, you might still hear the echo of a deep, grinding scrape of lead against stone. A sound that speaks of an invisible, contained struggle against gravity and death itself that continues to this day.
We're going to transition now from that kind of contained personal terror and physical impossibility to a mystery of vast, indifferent wildness. We move north, far across the sea, to the Flannan Isles in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. This is December 1900. The setting here is so stark. Eileen Moor, the largest of the 7 jagged teeth of black rock that make up the Isles. On it stood a single white lighthouse tower, a finger of order pointing out into the chaotic, immense sea.
And this is a story about the destruction of routine, the silent erasure of 3 professional lives.
These were not random men. The Northern Lighthouse Board's tower required 3 experienced keepers to maintain the clockwork. James Ducat, the principal keeper, Thomas Marshall II, and Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper.
They were landed by the relief tender, the Hesperus, on December 7th. All supplies were checked, all equipment was in perfect order. These men were experts in isolation. For 2 weeks, their light was a faithful star. But beginning on December 15th, storms began to rage, which prevented visual confirmation from the mainland. When the Hesperus finally managed to return on December 26th, the dread settled instantly.
There was no flag raised, no wave from the tower window, and crucially, the light was blind.
Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, was sent alone up the 200-foot cliff path, and his ascent must have been absolutely terrifying.
The island, usually deafening with wind and wave, was now described as preternaturally still.
He noted immediately that the supply boxes had been left untouched on the landing dock. Then, the first critical physical contradiction, the main lighthouse door was unlocked.
Which is a strange and utterly unacceptable breach of security protocol for a December night, especially by 3 seasoned keepers.
No smoke, no sound of life, just silence.
The interior was a chilling tableau of interrupted routine. The kitchen was described as a monument to interrupted life.
The clock had stopped at a meaningless hour. The fire in the grate was dead, just cold, white ash. The table was set for a meal that never came. Mutton and potatoes congealed, suggesting they planned to eat soon, but something interrupted them immediately.
And one chair was overturned, as if kicked back in haste. Time for these 3 men had been snipped clean through at a moment of expected routine.
And the greatest contradiction was in the lamp room, the very heart of the operation. The massive Fresnel lens lamp was pristine. It was filled with oil. The wick was trimmed. It was ready for lighting.
But it had not been lit. Why would 3 professional men, whose sacred duty was to that light, all abandon their posts simultaneously?
Moore found the logbook, the scripture of routine, filled until the morning of December 15th. The early entries spoke of fierce winds, which was expected. Principal keeper Ducat noted strong, relentless gales.
But the final entry, scrolled by Second Keeper Marshall, is what deepens the mystery and, for me, invalidates all the initial rescue theories.
Marshall's last addendum reads, "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all."
Storm ended. Sea calm. So if Marshall's entry is true, then whatever happened after the storm had finished and the sea was calm. This contradicts the immediate expectation of some sudden, disastrous rogue wave during a tempest.
Right, why would they all rush out when the weather had cleared? It makes no sense.
And yet there was undeniable violence outside. Moore rushed down to check the West Landing, the primary docking area.
And the sources detail a terrifying scene of localized destruction. The gearbox containing critical equipment was smashed. Iron railings, thick as a man's arm, were bent at perfect right angles, torn from their deep concrete roots.
And most strikingly, a huge stone slab weighing over a ton had been wrenched from its established place and shifted several feet.
This was focused violence, impossibly strong and concentrated only at that one spot. Yet the grass and the earth immediately above the cliff were completely unscuffed.
So there was no landslide? No sign of a general flood or devastation across the island? The force was immense and surgically precise. But still, no bodies, no sign of a struggle leading up the path back to the lighthouse.
Which brings us to the official theory, the heroic wave theory. It posits that Ducat and Marshall rushed out to secure the landing after the storm, were swept away by an unexpected rogue wave, and MacArthur followed them in a futile rescue attempt.
It sounds neat, it sounds brave, but I have to challenge this based on the non-negotiable evidence.
And you must. The theory falls apart completely when you examine the equipment shed. This is the central contradiction that kills all the mundane explanations.
In the shed, 2 sets of oilskins and heavy sea boots were missing. That would be Ducat and Marshall.
But Donald MacArthur's oilskins and sea boots were hanging neatly on their peg.
And think about that key detail for a moment, you the listener who understands the sea. MacArthur was an experienced professional sailor, a practical man who knew the deadly danger of the North Atlantic.
He would never go out onto the wet rocks of a landing, even in calm weather, without his heavy oilskins and sea boots. Why would he run out into a massive, wave-swept area in his ordinary clothes?
Leaving his protection behind, especially when the logbook claimed the sea was calm. It doesn't fit.
The untouched meal, the stopped clock, the extreme focused violence at the West Landing, the calm sea entry in the log, and the single set of oilskins left behind, they form a geometric problem that cannot be solved by a simple wave or a quick, simultaneous accident.
If 3 men went out to secure the landing, they all would have worn their gear. It's protocol, it's common sense.
And if 2 were washed away, the third, MacArthur, would have stayed inside to relight the lamp and radio for help, following protocol. He wouldn't dash into the immense wild without his coat.
The search that followed was exhaustive. They found nothing. No bodies, no scraps of cloth, nothing washing ashore in the following weeks.
It's as if the line between man and the immense, indifferent wild was just erased instantly, leaving behind only contradictions and the silence that followed the stopped clock.
They just dissolved, leaving the mystery of what could have drawn 3 professional men outside, at the same time when one of them left his coat on the peg.
If the Flannan Isles were about silent erasure, our final deep dive moves to the Strait of Malacca, where the terror was instantaneous, vast, and accompanied by an audible scream.
This is the ultimate ghost ship narrative, and it's confirmed by documented radio distress calls and survivor accounts from the boarding vessel.
The year is 1947. The air in the Strait of Malacca is thick and heavy, the sea is glassy, just holding its breath, and the silence was violently broken by a distress signal received by an American vessel, the Silver Star.
It began not with words, but with a scream of pure, panicked static. This white noise nightmare that preceded the desperate Morse code, SOS.
The radio operator on the Silver Star managed to tune and clear the signal just long enough for the horror to get through. A voice, clearly male, speaking English, but shredded by overwhelming fear, gasped this terrifying message.
All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and on bridge, possibly whole crew dead.
That initial message is chilling enough. It suggests some sudden catastrophic event, but what followed is pure auditory horror that haunts the official records.
There was a staccato of choking, a low, guttural moan that sounded less human and more like the straining of structural steel.
And then a final, clear whisper, clear as a knife through glass, right before the signal cut out. "I die."
Followed immediately by the sound of a heavy body hitting the floor. Then only silence, replaced by a static hiss that sounded, to the listening operator, like a serpent's laugh.
The Silver Star located the source and found the Dutch freighter, the Orang Medan, suspended in a glassy sea. A perfect ghost ship, utterly unresponsive.
What the boarding party found was a gallery of frozen, silent screams. Every man, captain, officers, crew, even the ship's dog was dead, scattered across the decks and in the corridors.
And the tableau of death is the core of this mystery. We need to detail this horrifying scene. On the bridge, the captain stared at the open sky, his eyes wide, described as marbles of pure, unadulterated terror, his mouth a black O of a silent shout.
And all the officers and crew members wore the same uniform mask of awful final fear. This wasn't violence, it wasn't disease, it wasn't a struggle. The sources are clear that their demise was from instantaneous psychological shock.
The physical mystery deepens immediately, defeating any theory of violence or simple poison. There were no wounds, no signs of a physical struggle, no blood, no evidence of conventional poison, no breach in the hull, and no fire when they initially boarded.
The only physical evidence, aside from that terrifying rictus on their faces, was the unnatural cold clinging to the bodies.
The boarding party reported that a deep chill permeated the corpses and clung to their skin, even in the tropical heat of the Malacca Strait. This cold seemed to seep into the very bones of the living men who touched them,
Suggesting that their very souls had been flash frozen by a sight or an event beyond human madness.
This uniform expression and the lack of physical injury, it eliminates simple violence. A poison that kills instantly and leaves such a mask of fear is theoretically possible, but usually a chemical agent leaves some physical trace or characteristic symptom.
What we have here is a sudden, overwhelming force, potentially atmospheric or psychological, that manifests as immediate, absolute terror.
The consuming conclusion came with astonishing speed. While the Silver Star crew was still investigating the bridge, they detected a faint, sweet, acrid odor, almost metallic. Then a thin, gray tendril of smoke began rising from the lowest decks.
The captain of the Silver Star ordered an immediate retreat, sensing that this was not a normal fire.
And he was right. The fire that erupted within minutes was unnatural. It didn't spread in the conventional sense. It consumed the interior with devastating speed. The sources describe it racing with a hungry, whispering roar.
As if feeding on the lingering terror or consuming some volatile, unseen internal substance.
The destruction was astonishingly fast. The boarding party barely made it back to the Silver Star before the orangutan suffered a final shuddering sigh and an internal convulsion.
Her midsection erupted. She folded in on herself violently and was dragged down swiftly and completely. She took her terrible sequel to the black, silent depths of the strait.
And left behind was only a patch of violently bubbling sea, charred debris, and a question that hangs heavy in the historical record. What did they see? Or what force struck them?
What unseen agent kills an entire crew, etches a scream onto every single face, and then lights a match to hide its own tracks by exploding and sinking the vessel within minutes of discovery?
The mystery vanished with the ship, leaving only the memory of the phantom crackle and the fading whisper, "I die."
We've examined 4 profound moments where the world outside the human mind, be it a Tennessee farm, a Barbadian tomb, a Scottish rock, or a Malacca freighter, rejected the laws of physics and the sanctity of life.
We saw the controlled personal hatred of the Bell Witch, the enclosed, chaotic, physics-defying rage of the Barbados Vault, the silent, geometric erasure of the Flannan Keepers, and the flash freeze of pure, overwhelming terror aboard the orangutan.
The common threads are impossible to ignore. Isolation, sudden overwhelming force, and the resulting terrifying, inexplicable evidence left behind.
And you have to think of the contradiction in each case. That's the key knowledge gained. The intact marble seal versus the hurled heavy coffins.
The log entry noting a calm sea versus the demolished landing and the single set of hung oilskins.
The Bell Witch's cackling song of victory versus the quiet, documented chemical death of a patriarch.
In every single one of these cases, any attempt at a rational explanation fails because the evidence creates an unsolvable riddle. We can't say a rogue wave took the Flannan Keepers because of the oilskins in the log.
We can't say vandals moved the Barbados coffins because the sand was undisturbed and the seal was intact.
The true knowledge gained from studying these events is not in finding a neat scientific answer, but in acknowledging the limits of the tangible.
Exactly. Being well-informed sometimes means recognizing that the enduring narrative of these events is often built on what did not happen just as much as what did.
What didn't happen in Barbados? The sand was not disturbed.
What didn't happen on Flannan Isle? McArthur didn't put on his coat.
What didn't happen on the orangutan? There was no struggle or wound.
And if we connect these 4 terrible stories, a pattern starts to emerge regarding the very nature of the unexplained. In the stories of the Bell Witch and the moving coffins, the entity's focus seemed rooted in this intense, deeply personal hatred of the family patriarchs, John Bell and Thomas Chase.
The terror was specific, it was measured, and it was driven by a malice that spanned years. It was personal.
But in the Flannan Isles and the orangutan, the terror was vast, sudden, and seemingly impersonal. It was a force that simply struck and consumed, leaving behind an instantaneous, terrifying void. No motive, just the result of a geometric physical failure or a flash freeze of the soul.
Which leaves us with this final question for you to consider. What does it say about the forces of the unexplained, that this spectrum exists? Ranging from a whispering, personal hatred confined to a closed room, to a consuming, massive force that strikes impersonally across the open ocean.
And if these forces are real, why is the only evidence left behind not a body or a motive, but always in the end an unsolvable contradiction?
Think on that until our next deep dive.